Good evening and welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library on AADL TV. Thanks for tuning in for tonight's presentation of Exploring the Mind with the University of Michigan Department of Psychology. In just a moment, Christopher Monk will introduce our guest, Dr. Robin Edelstein. To find past Exploring the Mind programs or view other virtual events, visit aadl.tv.
It is my pleasure to have Dr. Robin Edelstein present some of her very exciting work. Robin is a professor in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Michigan. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of California at Berkeley. She went on to receive her PhD in social and personality psychology from the University of California at Davis, and then she was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of California at Irvine. Then in 2007, we were lucky that she decided to leave California and join us here at the University of Michigan. Robin examines how emotional and interpersonal processes differ between people. She is particularly interested in individual differences in people's experiences in close relationships, how these differences develop, and how they change over time and across the lifespan. She has published many impressive papers on these topics, and she is a leading authority in this area. The title of Robin's talk is The Costs and Benefits of Testosterone in Close Relationship Contexts. Here is Dr. Robin Edelstein.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. So as Chris mentioned, I am a social personality psychologist, and I'm especially interested in individual differences in the ways that people approach relationships and their experiences in close relationships. And what I'll be talking about today is work that I've been doing in my lab over the past several years, looking at some physiological outcomes and precursors of close relationship processes, and specifically about related to the hormone testosterone. If you look at the way that testosterone is talked about and described in the media and popular culture, you might get the sense that testosterone is especially important for men and that it's important for many things masculine. And it might actually be problematic for women. So if you're a man, you might want higher testosterone, so higher sex drive, more muscle mass, etc. And there's quite a large amount of marketing being targeted to men, specifically talking about, do you have low testosterone? Might you want to optimize your testosterone? This is something I found on a website called The Art of Manliness, which is trying to talk about some of the benefits, arguable benefits of having high testosterone. So you might be happier, more confident, sharper mind versus tired, depressed, and having more fat tissue. And so as you might expect, you may not be surprised to hear that the actual story is a bit more complicated and I think more interesting as well. So what I'll talk about today is some of the work that I and others have done looking at testosterone in a bit of a more nuanced way. So testosterone is a steroid hormone that is important for physical development and behavior regulation. And one thing that's really important to keep in mind throughout my talk today is that testosterone is indeed higher among men versus women, but it's important for both. And this is one of the cases where there actually are quite large sex differences, but they're not entirely non-overlapping. So there's some similarities. And regardless, what I want to emphasize today is that many of the effects that we see for testosterone are similar across both men and women. I also want to highlight that this is a hormone that has what I think of as both trait and state-like features. So on the one hand, our testosterone levels are trait-like in the sense that if I measured your or my hormones today, and again tomorrow, there'd be some stability over time. And there are also some diurnal changes. So people's hormones change over the course of the day, but within certain periods of time, there's a good amount of stability. But testosterone and many other hormones also have some state-like features, which means that they are responsive to the environment. So if I measured my hormones today and then got into some sort of competition or a fight, or I went for a run, you would see these state-like changes. And so what I want to talk about to begin are a couple of theoretical models that talk about sort of thinking about testosterone in this sort of trait and state-like way, talk about what are thought of as testosterone trade-offs. So there's kind of costs and benefits of high versus low testosterone. And so from the pictures that I talked about at the beginning of my talk, you might assume that testosterone is associated with, competition, aggression, sexual motivation, sexual desire. And that is often the case. So people with higher testosterone tend to do better at competitions often. Following a competition, people's testosterone tends to increase. But on the flip side of this, there are quite a lot of costs associated with producing testosterone. So it can be metabolically costly. And so we're sort of adapted to produce testosterone when it might be most useful. And the other side of this is that actually there are many contexts, and specifically close relationship contexts, where high levels of testosterone may actually be problematic, right? So having a lot of competition and aggression in a romantic relationship may not be all that helpful, right? And same thing with raising children. And so this literature has sort of looked at this trade-off in terms of when high testosterone might be helpful, so more competitive, aggressive contexts, versus when low testosterone might be helpful. And this is more in relationship context. And that's what I'll be primarily focusing on today, is the situations in which low testosterone may be both beneficial and the context in which testosterone may decrease or become lower. So just to give you a brief summary of some of the work that has already been done. So in general, lower testosterone has been associated with both partnering and parenting. So there's a pretty good amount of evidence suggesting that testosterone is lower among people who are in committed relationships versus people who are single, and among people who are parents versus people who do not have children. And the idea here is that there's arguably something about this process, so about getting into a committed relationship, becoming a parent, that may lower testosterone. And there's still a lot of work to be done to understand sort of why this might be happening. But one idea is that if you go back to the processes for which low testosterone may be helpful, it may be more evolutionarily adaptive, beneficial to have low testosterone when you're in this kind of close relationship, right? You don't want to be very aggressive when you have young children around, for instance. What I think is potentially even more interesting is that once people are in relationships, there's some emerging evidence suggesting that lower testosterone is related to better outcomes in those relationships. So it's not just the case that testosterone may decrease when you get into a relationship or have children, but that once those relationships are established, that lower testosterone is related to markers of relationship, better romantic relationship quality, and more engaged parenting. And what I want to highlight throughout my talk today is that often these effects are found among both men and women. And I'll be talking a bit about what I will be calling partner effects. So it's not only the case in many of these studies that not only am I happier in my relationship to the extent that I have lower testosterone, but my partner may be happier as well. And so thinking about the ways in which our hormones can influence not only our relationship processes, but also our partners. And so these last 3 points are what I'll be especially focusing on today. So looking at testosterone as sort of an indicator of relationship quality and parenting, and the ways in which those experiences might also in turn affect hormones. And I'll be highlighting the ways in which these effects may be similar or different among men and women, and also to the extent that there are these partner effects, so the ways in which our partner's hormones may also affect our outcomes. So I'll start then with the first study that my lab did on this topic. And this was just looking at a fairly straightforward question about, is testosterone related to relationship quality? So are sort of what we think of as like baseline levels, you come into the lab on any given day, are your hormone levels related to your relationship outcomes? And so what we did in this study, we had 39 heterosexual or opposite sex couples come into the lab. They were ranging in age from 18 to 32, together from 2 months to 7 years. And we measure testosterone in all of the studies I'll talk about today. We measure testosterone through saliva samples. And this is one of my graduate students, Christy Chin, who is helping to analyze the samples. And she is one of the authors on many of the studies that I'll be presenting today. So we have people spit into tubes. You may be more familiar with this now from COVID testing, but it's actually quite similar. So they're spitting into tubes, and then we're able to assay testosterone from these samples. So in this study, we collected saliva samples, and we asked participants a variety of questions to measure different aspects of relationship quality. So one is satisfaction. So this is how happy does this relationship make you? So this is just one sample item. Our relationship makes me very happy. Another aspect is commitment. And I think of commitment as sort of a forward-looking measure of relationship quality. So it's, you might be happy right now, but do you want this relationship to continue into the future? An investment is about, I think, more backward looking. So it's how much have you put into this relationship? So my partner and I share many memories. Some of the other items on this scale get at sort of what would be lost if the relationship were to end. So you've sort of put a lot into it. And I think this measure is sort of interesting because you can think about ways which you might be very happy right now, not especially invested. You might be very invested, but not committed. So they're related to each other, but they're not measuring the same thing. And so what we found in this initial study was that just measured at the same point in time was that both men and women who had higher testosterone reported lower levels of satisfaction and lower relationship commitment. We found a similar pattern for investment, but this effect was not significant. And we can think of these as what I'm going to call actor effects. So these are associations between a person's own testosterone and their relationship outcomes. And we found a really similar pattern of effects for partner effects as well. So it's both the case that people reported more satisfaction and commitment when they had lower testosterone, but also when their partners did. And what I think was really interesting, another interesting piece of this first study was that the links were actually stronger between women's testosterone and men's relationship quality. And so again, I think this speaks to this idea that testosterone kind of only matters for men. And there's actually some argument that because women have lower levels, these small differences might actually be more consequential. So this is, I think, sort of a first pass showing that there are these really interesting associations. And I want to be clear too, that when I use the terms like effects, like partner effects, and I'm using these arrows, which might suggest that I think that testosterone sort of causes relationship outcomes. We don't actually know that. It could certainly be the case that being in a happy relationship lowers your testosterone, and most likely both are going on. It's probably a bidirectional process. And so what we wanted to do in this next set of studies is look over time and look at how both testosterone and some relationship outcomes may change over time. So in this study, this is a longitudinal study that I conducted a couple of years ago in my lab, and we were interested in a period of time when a lot of things are changing, including hormones. And so we looked at the transition to parenthood. And as I'm sure many of you know, this is a major life event, and it is very often exciting, also very stressful. And there's quite a lot of research looking at the psychological changes that occur during this time. So many couples report at least a small decline in relationship satisfaction. Many people report increases in depression, stress, and conflict. What has, I think, received less attention, though, are the really marked physiological changes that happen during this time. And so the changes are really marked in women. So women, certainly during pregnancy and the postpartum, show very large changes in hormones. But there's some really interesting work, and what I think sort of led me to this study was this really interesting work looking at men. So there's some evidence that men also show hormone changes throughout this transition to parenthood or fatherhood. And so I was especially interested in, what might be going on there, what might be driving these changes, does everyone show them, and might these changes also have implications for postpartum outcomes? And so just to give you a little bit of background, so what is going on with testosterone during this time is that, as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, in general, if you compare hormone levels of mothers versus women without children, women with children have lower testosterone compared to women without. But during pregnancy, there are these quite large increases in testosterone, followed by fairly sharp postpartum declines. And so together, this suggests that even though there are these big increases, that levels then fall to before pre-pregnancy levels. And part of what is going on is a lot of the hormones are actually in the placenta. So when women deliver the baby, that's where a lot of the hormone changes are happening. So this is fairly straightforward. This is fairly well documented. What's, I think, less well understood is what's going on with fathers. And so again, just like with mothers, as I mentioned, there's a large number of studies showing that fathers have lower testosterone than men without children. And there's a little bit of longitudinal evidence suggesting that what's happening is if we measure testosterone before babies are born and after, there seems to be a decline, but there's much less evidence sort of showing this trajectory. So it's harder to separate. So is it that fatherhood lowers testosterone? I mean, it's possible that lower testosterone leads to fatherhood. It's a little bit less likely, but there's not a lot of evidence looking at that trajectory. And so what we were interested in this study, there's a couple of driving questions. And so one was, when do these changes begin? So one thing I was really interested in is is it about thinking about becoming a parent? Do you actually need to sort of interact with the child? Like what, and thinking about, again, like as a personality psychologist, I'm always thinking about who might show these changes more than others. So would more involved fathers show these changes, et cetera. And then we started thinking also about, is this about fatherhood or partnerhood? So would we see similar changes in female partners, for instance? So fathers certainly are not experiencing the physical changes associated with pregnancy. There's arguably nothing sort of special about fatherhood versus like parenthood in this particular case. So this led us to then include same-sex couples in our sample, which I'll get to in a second. We were also interested in the implications of these changes. So understanding what happens after people's hormones change can give us some insight into what the function of these changes might be. And so as I argued earlier in the talk, there's some idea that it's adaptive to have lower testosterone once you have children. So you're sort of less aggressive, you might be more nurturant, you might be more focused on maintaining that romantic relationship. And so we were interested in whether these changes that we're seeing during the prenatal period might predict outcomes once babies are born. We were also interested in whether testosterone levels might be associated within couples. And this is something I haven't mentioned yet today, but there's some evidence that other hormones may be sort of coordinated or synchronized, and then especially during these sorts of transitions. And so this was a bit of an open question at this point. And finally, as I mentioned, we were interested to see whether we might see some similar processes in same-sex couples. And there's a lot of research on the transition to parenthood. There's a lot of research on testosterone and fatherhood. There's almost none looking at including same-sex couples in these samples. And so we were really interested, again, in whether some of these processes, are they specific to fathers? We thought probably not. Or might we see them in lesbian couples as well? So in this study, we had 58 couples, half heterosexual couples, half lesbian couples. And we followed them throughout pregnancy. So we had them come in as pretty much as early as we could recruit them. So starting around weeks 12, and then at week 20, 28, and 36, so 4 assessments across pregnancy. And again, as in the first study, we had them provide saliva samples that we used to assess testosterone. And we had them fill out a variety of questionnaires at every time point. And so we were interested in, I'm just going to focus on some of the key findings, but we were interested in changes in relationship outcomes, stress, relationship quality, parenting, all these kinds of things. And then once their babies were born, we had them complete follow-ups at 3 and 9 months postpartum. And we have a bigger sample at the 3-month assessment, and the findings are largely the same between the two. So I'm going to focus today just on those 3-month assessments. So what we found, and what I'm showing you here, has been fairly well established, and I think also it's just helpful to see what this actually looks like. So this is plotting women's testosterone across the week of pregnancy here. And what we see is a very large increase. And I'll show you in comparison to men's hormones, you could see that this is sort of a marked increase from their baseline. So compared to fathers, so we saw a very small but statistically significant decline in men's testosterone throughout pregnancy. So it suggests that even early in pregnancy, when their partners are pregnant, men are showing this decline, which suggests it may have something to do not about interacting with the baby, but maybe engaging with the pregnant woman, planning for pregnancy, maybe other activities that are involved in preparing to have a baby. And I just want to bring you back to this and to show you. So if you look here, these axes are pretty much the same. So we've got women up here to around 100, and it's almost on the same scale of the men. And this is something that you would never see in a sample of women who are not pregnant. So my only point here is just to show you kind of how high women's testosterone levels do get during pregnancy. We saw a similar pattern among pregnant women in the lesbian sample, so also another increase, getting fairly high toward the end there. And we didn't see any change in the lesbian co-parents. So it wasn't the case that we saw a decline. There's maybe a very, very small decline here, but it wasn't statistically significant. And this is something that I would like to follow up on and see, is it something about this sample per se? It is a fairly small sample. Might it be that these changes are happening even earlier for these couples? We don't really know, but I don't necessarily have any reason to think that we wouldn't or couldn't show these changes in perhaps in other samples. And so what we did in both samples is we looked then at 3 months to see, do the patterns of hormone changes that we saw prenatally predict postpartum outcome measures? And so these are the same measures that I showed you in that first study. So looking at, again, satisfaction, commitment, and investment. And then we added a couple of parenting specific measures. So specifically, perceived partner support. And an example here is I'm satisfied with the amount of time my partner gives our baby. So it's a lot of like help, but more like not as much concrete help. It's sort of like, I feel supported, I'm getting help with baby care. We also asked about general division of labor. So we asked both partners a variety of tasks. So like who is taking out the trash, who is cooking and cleaning, and each person rates it on I'm doing more, my partner is doing more. And same thing with division of infant care. So these are more specific about changing diapers, soothing crying babies, things like that. And I'll note, this may not be surprising, that most people everyone reports doing more. So in general, people agree that the mother is doing more of the infant care, but everyone thinks they're doing more than their partner thinks that they're doing. But it still tends to be these are fairly useful measures. And so what I'll walk you through now is I'm sort of collapsing across samples in cases where it's useful, but the question again is, how do these hormone changes prenatally predict postpartum outcomes? And so it's useful, again, I think, to think about these different trajectories. So women's hormones are going up, women's testosterone is going up, men's testosterone is going down. And so, but in general, we can think about lower testosterone as being better for postpartum outcomes. And that is essentially what we found across a variety of measures. So in general, for birth mothers, and again, these are going to be actor effects. So these are birth mothers' own testosterone. So birth mothers who had lower average testosterone levels and smaller increases. So remember, women are increasing in general, but those who showed smaller increases reported doing more infant care. And they were also reporting more relationship satisfaction and commitment. So they were sort of happier in their relationships postpartum. And again, these are predicted from prenatal testosterone measures. We didn't, unfortunately, measure hormone levels postpartum. That's something I would really like to do in a future study. Similar set of findings among fathers, and these are sort of all in the general same direction. So fathers who had, again, lower average prenatal testosterone and larger declines. So again, remember, men are declining in general, but those who had sharper declines reported being more satisfied, invested in commitment in their relationships at 3 months. They reported doing more infant care and receiving more support from their partner. same general pattern among non-birth mothers. And so again, we weren't seeing overall changes in this sample of women, but women non-birth mothers who had lower average testosterone reported, again, doing more infant care, more household labor, receiving more support from their partner, and being more invested in their relationship. Now, again, these are the after effects. So it's one person's hormones and their outcomes. And these ones get a little bit confusing, I think, but we also found a good number of partner effects. So these would be examples where so in this case, when birth mothers had lower average prenatal testosterone or smaller increases in testosterone, their male partners reported receiving more support from them, and their female partners reported that they were happier, more committed, and more satisfied in their relationship. So there are, again, these sort of links between a partner's hormones and one's own outcomes. For fathers, so again, when fathers had lower average prenatal testosterone and larger testosterone declines, their female partners reported that they actually got more help. So if you remember from the last slide, everyone's reporting on what they're doing, but it's really interesting, I think, to see this verification from the other reporter. So mothers are saying they're actually getting more help with infant care and household labor when fathers had lower testosterone. And for non-birth mothers, when their female partners had lower testosterone, they reported being, again, more satisfied and more satisfied with their relationships and doing more infant care, so that their partners, when their partners had lower testosterone, they were saying that they were helping more with infant care. So I think all of this sort of comes together to suggest that there are, mostly it seems, good outcomes associated with having lower testosterone throughout this period. And I do just want to note that throughout this talk, actually, when I'm talking about, very high, very low, I'm talking within a normal range. I'm not talking about clinically low testosterone. Very, very high levels of testosterone during pregnancy can actually be a problem, as can very low. So I'm talking sort of within this normal range. So assuming an increase, but talking about sort of less of an increase. And as I mentioned, we also looked at the correlation in testosterone levels within couples, and very few studies had actually looked at this correlation. So there's some evidence throughout different studies that there's some linkage that in couples, so that men who have higher testosterone may have female partners who have higher testosterone as well. But this was one of the first studies to really try to unpack this. And we did find, this is a scatter plot here. So we've got mother's testosterone on this y-axis, fathers on the x. And again, this is not a very large correlation, but it's significant. So there's a positive association. So again, this is looking over time. So when women had higher testosterone, so did their male partners, and it works the same way in terms of lower. And one thing that I think is really interesting here, and I think sort of hard to wrap your head around, is that, again, they're moving in opposite directions. So there's something about this sort of rank ordering. So women are increasing, men are decreasing, but there's still kind of this coordination between them. And one marker that we found is that, and we only found this for fathers, but so you can see, if I go back here, let's see. So in some cases, right, there's a stronger correlation. So like this couple here, they're both quite high. This couple here is both fairly low. So for fathers, when their testosterone levels were more highly correlated with their female partners, at the postpartum assessment, they reported being more satisfied, committed, and investment. So it's suggesting that it's not only lower testosterone, but some kind of synchrony with the partner or coordination might be important. And this is, I believe, the only study that has really looked at sort of the implications of this coordination in testosterone. So we certainly think that there should be more research to look into this, but it suggests that there might be some benefit to having this coordination as well. Now, we did find that a similar pattern of correlation in the lesbian sample. So again, we've got pregnant women's testosterone here and their female partners here. They were positively correlated, but we haven't seen any evidence yet that those correlations are predicting outcomes. And again, some of that may have to do with the fact that we didn't see much movement in female partners' testosterone throughout pregnancy. just to sum up this project, I think about these as sort of longer term changes in testosterone during the transition to parenthood. And I think in terms of takeaways, in general, women's testosterone increased prenatally, and lower levels and smaller increases led to better outcomes, both for their romantic relationships and also for their parenting. Men's testosterone declined prenatally, and these are much smaller effects, but I think still quite interesting and meaningful. And one really interesting, I think, takeaway is that these changes seem to be happening pretty early on. And I would be really interested to understand kind of why. I still think we have a question of like, what is driving that? And so is it, if you're not living with your partner, I think a piece of it must be sort of engagement in sort of planning to have this baby. So maybe you're not parenting yet, but you're thinking about it. And I think to the extent that we could look at those individual differences, I think those could be really interesting. But in general, again, we found that lower levels or larger decreases among men led to better outcomes. And there were quite a few partner effects here. So, and in some of the samples or in some of the analyses we did, it looked like there may actually be more partner effects. So in some ways, your partner's hormones may be influencing you just as much, if not more, than your own hormones. We found some evidence for similar links among same-sex couples, some differences, and I think, again, something we would really like to look at further. And some evidence in both samples for within-couple associations, and some evidence that the stronger these within-couple associations are, the better relationship outcomes we might see. And I want to just, one thing that I think is worth mentioning in terms of this particular sample, and often many samples I think that participate in couples research and will come to the lab, these were very high functioning, very sort of happy, well-adjusted couples, and almost all planned pregnancies, certainly in the lesbian sample, these were very wanted babies. And so I think we're missing some variability here in terms of some of these links. And so I think looking at like a larger, more diverse sample might give us some really interesting new data and sort of more nuanced effects, I think. So I want to turn now to what we've been doing more recently in my lab and looking at shorter term changes. And so I think taking another step also to look at causality. And so it's even with these longitudinal studies, so we know that the hormone changes come before some of these outcomes. It's still a bit hard to sort of understand what might be causing some of these hormone changes. And so what we've been doing in my lab is using experimental methods to manipulate people's context to look at changes in hormones. So in this first study, we looked at short-term changes. I'll talk about two studies today where we're looking at short-term changes in testosterone following relationship interactions. And this first study was really taken right from this idea that there's something about becoming a parent that lowers testosterone. There's something about having low testosterone that seems to help with parenting. And so we were interested in whether these short-term interactions that people may have with their children might affect people's hormones. And so this was a sample that was originally collected by Brenda Voling, who is also here in Michigan Psychology. And she had this really wonderful sample of parents who came to the lab and engaged in 2 interactions with their 1-year-old infants. And the first was just a teaching task, like a play task. And so this was not stressful, just kind of a run-of-the-mill thing you might do with your child at home. And they also participated in what is called the strange situation task, which is designed to be stressful. So it's a series of separations and reunions with an infant. And so some of you may have heard this before, or maybe have seen it. What happens is that the parent, you bring your infant into a room, they sort of get acquainted, and then the parent will leave. And the infant is sometimes with a stranger, sometimes with the stranger is like an experimenter. There's a brief period where the infant is all alone. And these are like 1-ish-year-olds. And this is really stressful for them. And there's someone watching the whole time. It's not dangerous for them in any way, but it's really stressful for the infants. And part of what is being measured here is how the infants respond both to the separation, but especially to that reunion. So how easily comforted are they when the parent comes back? And so we were interested in comparing these two tasks. So this stressful task should elicit kind of nurturance and caregiving, and we thought that it should lower testosterone, whereas this teaching task shouldn't really affect hormones. And one thing that I don't know if I mentioned this very clearly at the beginning, if you sort of left to your own devices, most hormones decline over the course of the day. So when we wake up, our testosterone levels are typically like as high as they're going to be. Same thing with cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And so kind of just left on their own, most people see sort of a decline across the day. Okay. So again, in the study, participants provided saliva samples. And in this study, we had a pre and a post. So before the task and after the task. So before both tasks and after both tasks. And then we had participants fill out questionnaires. And in this study, we had an opportunity to get a little bit at what might drive these changes. So not only might it be caregiving, but are there individual differences? So again, I'm always really interested in like why some people might show this effect, who might show this effect stronger than others. And so what we measured is parents' attachment avoidance, which is you can think about as sort of comfort with closeness. So the items on this measure are things like, I find it hard to get close to people. It makes me uncomfortable when people get too close. I kind of like to be independent. And one thing that I think that is really interesting is this is a measure that is focused on romantic relationships. So it's pretty general, but it's asking about how you feel in close romantic relationships. But some of the early work that I did in grad school and since then has shown that there's something more general about it. It nevertheless predicts behavior in other relationships, including in parent-child relationships. So I think it's a really useful way to get at sort of how comfortable people are with these kind of stressful, nurturant interactions. Okay. So what we found here is that there was a decline in testosterone in both conditions. And what's the reason why I mentioned before about this decline over the day is sort of if you don't do anything, you would expect a decline. And so what we're graphing here is the change in testosterone now, and this is a percent change. So given that there are very large baseline individual differences, what we do is we correct for those differences by computing a percentage score. So given how you came into the experiment, what percentage change are you showing? And these are the two conditions here. So in the play condition, there was a small and not significantly different from zero decrease in testosterone, but we did see a larger decrease in the strange situation task or the stressful task. And these were significantly different from each other. So these findings suggest to us that there seems to be something special about this stressful situation. So it's not just about the passage of time, it's possibly about sort of giving care to this distressed child. And I think what contributes to that conclusion is that we also found that less avoidant fathers showed larger declines. So I know this is sort of going back and forth a little bit again. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. Okay, so we're seeing an overall decline, right? But among fathers, and this was something we didn't see this effect among mothers, and I apologize. One thing I should have mentioned here is that we saw very similar effects for both mothers and fathers. So both mothers and fathers are showing this decline. But only among fathers were these changes associated with avoidance. And so remember, again, this is comfort with closeness. So these are fathers who are saying, I don't like to get too close to other people. I like to feel sort of self-sufficient. They're showing smaller testosterone declines in this study. Just to go back here again, right? So thinking about some of this variability, the less avoidant fathers might be sort of further down here. And again, I think this suggests that there is something about the caregiving nature of that task that might be eliciting these changes in testosterone. And we don't have a great understanding yet as to why mothers didn't show these effects. I think part of it may be that this is a more common experience. This separation may be more common among mothers. It may be sort of less likely to elicit these kind of avoidance strategies is the way I think about it. But we don't know for sure, but the evidence I think among fathers is really interesting. So the last study that I'll talk about is thinking about moving this from the parent-child domain to the romantic relationship domain. So again, are there contexts that we think might elicit decreases in testosterone as a function of interacting with relationship partners? And we thought about this as trying to think of sort of in some ways conceptually similar study to the one I just talked to you about. And I think there are ways we could have made it perhaps more similar, but we tried to think about what's sort of like a nurturant task that you might engage in with your partner. And we tried to keep it sort of, so certainly a major difference between the parent-infant and the adult romantic relationship is the addition of sort of a sexual component. And we tried to separate that out to the extent that we could. We wanted something that was more like emotionally intimate. And we can talk a little bit about how well we accomplished that. But we brought dating and married couples into the lab, and we had in this sample of 15 same-sex couples, so we could look a little bit at whether whether we saw differences as a function of sexual orientation. And we had participants engage in a semi-structured conversation task. And what this is there are two conditions. One is what we call, or what has been called, this is a small talk task. And we're thinking of this as sort of low intimacy versus a fast friends or high intimacy task. And I'll give you some examples. Some of you may be familiar with this. This particular task got a lot of attention about, I guess, 7 years ago now in a Modern Love column. This is it's worth reading if you haven't. So Art Aaron in the 90s developed this task as a way to get unacquainted people to feel closer. And it's all designed around self-disclosure. And so there's research suggesting that the more we share with others and the more that is reciprocated, the closer we feel to them. And so actually in this column, this journalist tried this with someone she had just met and tried to see, like, could she really fall in love with someone on a first date? And I'll let you read it and see how it ends. But just to give you some examples of the kinds of questions. So we wanted, again, sort of this high intimacy, low intimacy. So each task is about 30 minutes, and couples are given a set of questions to ask and to take turns asking each other. And just one example is in the small talk is, when was the last time you walked for more than an hour? There are questions, my lab really likes the one about, do you prefer real or fake Christmas trees? Sort of debate that. In the high intimacy one, their questions are designed to be similar, but sort of eliciting more self-disclosure. So when was the last time you cried in front of a person? What is your most treasured memory? Things like that. And as with our other studies, participants provided pre and post saliva samples, and they completed questionnaires about how they felt about the task, how they felt about their relationship. And again, we were really interested in whether and how hormones might change as a function of this task. And one thing I'll note is that participants really, really enjoyed this task. And even in both conditions, sort of equally well, the experimenter said that often they asked if they could take the questions home. They wanted to they couldn't get through all of them, so they really wanted to answer all of them. So it was really engaging, even the low intimacy one. And generally they were the conditions were rated as similarly fun and engaging, but they differed on that self-disclosure. So we did find that when we asked participants, how much did you disclose to your partner, that differed between the two conditions. And so again, what we thought was that this would be this sort of emotionally intimate task that might lower testosterone, right? It's sort of this nurturant interaction, we thought. But as I'm probably alluding to, what we found, it was the opposite. So again, we've got this percent change in testosterone between the two conditions. We've got low intimacy and high intimacy. And what we found actually is that there was really no change in testosterone in the low intimacy condition, but we did see an increase in the high intimacy condition. And I want to remind you again that if nothing was happening, we would expect decreases in both conditions. And so finding this increase suggests that there really may be something going on here, that something about this task might be eliciting an increase in testosterone. And we found this among both men and women. And we have looked quite a bit at what participants said about the task. Were they saying, like what we're thinking now is maybe there was something about like, were you more attracted to your partner during this task? There's some interesting research that like when you meet a new partner, your testosterone might go up. So there might be something about kind of rekindling the relationships. We don't have a good answer to this now, and it's something we would like to follow up on. We did find that self-disclosure did help to explain some of these effects. So as I mentioned, participants reported disclosing more in the high intimacy versus low intimacy condition. And accounting for that helped to account for some of the results. So some of this is due to self-disclosure, which could perhaps be sort of like exciting or make people think about like the early stages of their relationship. But this is something that we would really like to follow up on. And we're still sort of trying to figure out what would be a task then that might be more nurturant and not kind of as novel or exciting as this particular one. So just to wrap up some of the things that I've covered today. So in general, lower testosterone seems to be associated with more nurturant and higher quality relationships. And this is both in the domain of parenting and partnering. In general, both short and longer term changes in testosterone seem to be linked with nurturant relationship experiences and transitions that might pull for nurturance. And again, we want to think a little bit more about whether this last conversation task might have elicited more sort of novelty and attraction as opposed to nurturance. We're finding in general a lot of similar effects between men and women, and I highlighted a few that seem to differ. But in general, many findings generalize sort of across men and women. So I think I do want people to be careful with this idea that testosterone just matters for men. It clearly is not the case. We found a lot of dyadic associations or partner effects, as I mentioned. So it seems that testosterone matters not just for an individual, but for their partner as well. And some evidence for similar associations in same-sex couples. And I should have mentioned in the study, the interaction task study, the conversation study, we did have a subset of same-sex couples. And we don't have like really enough to do our own analysis just of that subset, but we're not seeing any wildly different patterns. So it seems like these increases in testosterone may occur across, like regardless of the gender of your partner. And just to return to where I started at the beginning, again, I think it's really easy to get this idea that testosterone, like you, first of all, should want more of it, especially if you're a man. And I would say that one of the most common questions I get like from journalists when they learn about these findings is like, what should we do about it? So, if I'm a father, like what should I tell fathers? Like, how do they get their testosterone back up again? And I think it's really important to think about the benefits as well. And again, we're talking about fairly small changes within a normal range. And I think you don't want to do anything about it. I think it actually can be helpful. And so I think it's worth thinking about the ways in which lower testosterone can actually be really helpful for relationships. So I just want to wrap up by thanking my collaborators. And these are pictures of my lab and my many student authors and now former students and the sources of our funding for this research. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was excellent, Robin. Really, really fun to hear about your work. All right, so I have a few questions for you. The first one is, when we talk about hormones and behavior, at least for me, I think for a lot of us, we start to think about evolution and how it may be adaptive. And I know, it's hard to come up with data really directly related to that, but I was wondering if you could maybe speculate a little bit about how these changes in testosterone across development and across these big life-changing events, how that might be good, how it may be adaptive, and how it may be helpful a little bit. And I just want to flag, some of this stuff, I'd love to hear more about the relationship stuff, but I was really struck by the findings of the pregnant women and that increases. That was a pretty dramatic increase. And I didn't know about that. So I'd just love to hear you talk about that. that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, the magnitude is, I think, really interesting too. And so one tricky thing about pregnancy per se is some of that is like supporting the fetus in development. And I mean, this is not something I have expertise in, but in trying to answer this question, trying to read articles, my sense was I don't think it's well understood. It's sort of something that happens. Too much testosterone is bad, too little is bad also, but I don't know if anyone totally knows what's going on there. So there's some idea. So some of it is about supporting pregnancy. There might be something about like defending offspring as well, sort of like a protective, something about that. I think though, it seems to me though, that clearly like it's beneficial to have lower testosterone when you like, especially as a father, I would think when you have children around, so you're not like being aggressive toward them. You're not out there looking for other partners. So one thing that higher testosterone will do, and I didn't probably spend enough time talking about this at the beginning, because I feel like it gets sort of so much attention, but like people with higher testosterone are more interested in other partners. They're more likely to cheat on their partners. It is linked with domestic violence and abuse. And so I think all of these things are not adaptive in those relationship contexts. And one thing, I guess, this doesn't totally speak to your question, but I think is also interesting is there's some cool work showing that, so yes, testosterone decreases when people become partnered. It then begins to increase after like around divorce. And so there's, again, it seems sort of there may be something functional about, okay, now like I need to find a new partner. I need to sort of get into this, high testosterone mode, that it may actually be helpful. And so actually, I would say all of this together suggests to me that there's something really adaptive about flexibility, about being able to sort of move back and forth when you need to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's not static, and there's a trait, but also it does fluctuate, as you're saying at the beginning.
Yeah. And I don't know that anyone has looked at this, but I think to the extent that you could like measure flexibility, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
People ask sometimes too about like, what if you're like, you have this high testosterone job at work and then you have to go home and take care of your children? And I could see that too as being useful, sort of like being able to go back and forth.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. And then I just have one smaller question. And this just speaks to my ignorance on the topic, but I imagine other people may be as well. So I thought other people might think of this as well. So could like part of the increase, I'm just dwelling on the pregnant women and testosterone, is that possible that that's at all related to the sex of the fetus at all? Does that play any role here?
It turns out, no, not in saliva. So in blood, and that's something I could have mentioned as well, is that we happen to measure testosterone and hormones from saliva, in part because it's a lot less intrusive and easier and cheaper and less dangerous. But another way is to get blood samples, which I think are probably more precise. And so in saliva, no, there's no association with the sex of the baby, which is interesting. I agree, but there is with blood. So there may be something going on there with women pregnant with male fetuses having higher testosterone.
Okay.
But it's not as big as you might think, so it suggests that a lot, and again, a lot of it leaves with the placenta. So a lot of it is sort of with the baby per se.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
But yeah, I had that question as well.
Okay.
And we looked a little bit at sex of the baby, and we're not seeing any consistent patterns in terms of that.
Okay, great. And so just two more questions. So one is just, I imagine you get this a lot about, like, obviously with the, in a family, I'm just thinking of the men here, like when spouse is pregnant and then you have a new baby, there's a lot of stress, a lot of sleep deprivation. How I would think that maybe that would knock down testosterone as well. I was wondering how that's considered in broader literature here.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone has looked at this carefully, but sorry about my dog back there. Yes. And so weight gain is another big one. And so often men do gain weight when their partners are pregnant, and that could be driving some of it for sure. Mm-hmm. So I think, like, and if you're perhaps eating differently or exercising differently, yeah, is that sort of what I think that's what you were asking, like what else might be driving it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so. And I would love to see, like, it's hard with a small sample. I would love to see something more careful about, like, a careful look into that.
Yeah.
And including, people often ask too about like men who experience pregnancy symptoms. And I can't remember exactly if it's Kuvad. I think Kuvad is how it's said. Whether that might be related sort of like to the changing hormones. So it is hard to know like what comes first.
Yeah.
I think it'd be super interesting too. I initially would like imagine like men who are deployed where their partners are pregnant. Like, would you see the same effects? Because then if it really is about kind of this mental preparation, you might see like you might still see the effects, but if it's about like lifestyle changes, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wait, and so my last question is actually related to all this. So the last study really does a nice job of getting at potential, like bringing us into the lab and trying to experimentally manipulate these things and seeing how testosterone changes. I thought that was really neat, and I just wanted to broaden that. Like if there's literature, or if you could speculate on some studies, how we can further get at cause and effect of testosterone and relationships, and I just some half-baked ideas. Like I don't know if there are medical conditions where situations where people need to take testosterone. You can do placebos, look before and after, and also like marriage, like interventions for marriage counseling and versus placebo, and if how those things, if there's any work on that, like who's really shown the cause and effect, kind of along the lines of what you've done.
Yeah. I think I have not kept up with this literature, so I can't. There is certainly testosterone administration studies. There are. So like giving people testosterone, and I can't remember if that is allowed in this country. I think they might often be done in other countries, but it's because it's, like giving people testosterone is a bit tricky. But those studies suggest that a lot of the effects are similar. So like administering testosterone can decrease empathy. I don't remember what else it does, but a lot of it, at least to the extent that I've seen those studies, some of them are similar. So I think that is one option. Yeah, I hadn't thought about like medical conditions. That would be interesting. I mean, I think a thing we've thought about, and I don't know how I would tackle this, is also there are people taking testosterone actually like for medically approved reasons. And I think you could track that over time. I mean, I think there's some confounds there, but I think I have thought it'd be really interesting to follow people who are either like transitioning or for some reason taking hormones to see how their psychological experiences and their relationships change. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.